webinar as well. So if you want a copy, or just so you know that only the participants, panelists here are the ones being recorded, not any of the people who registered to watch. So that's it.
Thank you, Michaela. Tonight's event is going to be facilitated by fellow docent Joanne Will Kaminsky. Joanne is one of our new docents, but I think this is this your third time you facilitated, Joanne?
Madam.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. And if you'd be kind enough to introduce tonight's author, we'd be very appreciative. Joanne?
Yes, and even though I'm new, I have loved the book club series because it just is so entertaining, and it's such a great thing to interact with the authors, which you don't get in some book groups. That's Susan Lynn Solomon is the facilitators of the Writers Critique Group that is co-sponsored by the Buffalo Central Library and Just Buffalo Literary Center, which I assume she's still attending to, but on Zoom. She's the author of short stories that have appeared in numerous literary journals. These include the one we have read, Abigail Bender, an award, actually awarded an honorable mention in a Writer's Journal short romance competition. Ginger Man, sounds pretty neat. Elvira, The Memory Tree, Going Home, Yesterday's Wings, Smoker's Lament, Kaddish, and Sabbath, which was nominated for the 2013 Best of the Net and winner of second place in the 2017 World Weaver Writing Competition. A collection of her short stories, Voices in My Head, I absolutely love that title because I think we all have them, has been released by Solstice Publishing. Susan is also the author of the Emlyn Goad Mysteries, a finalist in Chanticleer International Book Awards, Mystery and Mayhem novel category, and a finalist in the 2016 Book Excellence Award, her first Emlyn Goad novel, The Magic of Murder, which has received rave reviews, and as have the novelettes, Bella Vita, The Day the Music Died. I don't know if that's a contradiction with the, what's his name song there, Shot in the Woods, and 'Twas the Season. Stepping aside from mysteries, Miss Solomon's latest novel, Abigail's Window, has been awarded a gold medal as a finalist in the Reader's Favorite Novel Competition, and the Chanticleer International Book Award gave it the grand prize as the best paranormal romance of 2019. And Susan also shared with us, which she may talk more on, that she belongs to a novel writers group here in Buffalo. I wanted to thank you for participating in the Birchfield Penny Art Center Book Club. When I first picked up the book, I saw these 4 window panes peering out into the snow-covered landscape. I thought, this woman has spent some time in Western New York. And as the story unfolds from the first chapters, one who has experienced this type of snowfall can easily understand how travelers get stuck and snowbound in an inn on Niagara-on-the-Lake. So I wanted to let Susan do some reading for us all, and then we'll continue on with some questions about the book.
Joanne, thank you so much. I thought I would read the first 2 chapters of the book. It's about 9 to 10 pages. And in this book, as I do in all my books, the chapters are titled. A trick that I've learned from a very dear friend, Gary Earl Ross, who's an incredible writer and also a Buffalonian. Each chapter should really almost be a story in its own right. At any rate, Abigail's Window, Chapter 1, A Face in the Window. As I stepped from the rental car, I saw the lace curtains pulled aside in the second floor window. I felt eyes stare down at me. My jaw dropped. Had it followed me here? Ronnie Hoffman glanced at me over the roof of the car. What's wrong now? She said. I stood, blinking. With a shrug, she turned to Andrea O'Rourke, who popped the trunk and lifted our suitcases. When I looked again at the window, I saw a woman, but not quite a woman. She appeared to be transparent. Shuddering, I turned my back to the house. Yeah, I'm cold too, Katie. Get your suitcase. Ronnie took off her thick-rimmed glasses and brushed a strand of hair from her eyes. Though only in her early 30s, her long black hair showed streaks of gray. I wrapped my heavy coat tight around my chest, but didn't move. I hadn't wanted to come to Niagara-on-the-Lake, hadn't wanted to leave my apartment. After what I'd been through, I never wanted to venture out again. Ronnie had refused to let me become a hermit. You waiting for April now when the snow melts? She called to me. I lifted my eyes to the window. The curtains were closed. Feeling as though the woman continued to watch me, I shrank back against the car door. Somebody's up there. Andrea clicked her tongue. Another ghost? Ronnie slammed the car trunk closed. The Niagara Inn isn't any more haunted than your apartment. My friend knew what haunted me. She had helped to pull me through a breakdown 7 years ago. She didn't believe a ghost caused it then, and didn't believe one pushed me toward the edge this time. I pointed to the window. Don't you see her? Ronnie didn't bother to look. Probably another guest. The stiff Lake Ontario wind had turned Andrea's face almost as red as her hair. Looking around the empty parking lot, she said, can't be another guest. Nobody but us is stupid enough to travel in this weather. She hefted a suitcase. Yap out here if you want. I'm going inside. Shivering, I examined the bed and breakfast Ronnie had brought me to for a long, girls-only weekend. Pale behind the falling snow and surrounded by skeletons of azalea bushes and a row of evergreen hedges, the Niagara Inn rose 2 stories above what appeared to be an ancient brick foundation. Come on, I'm about to turn into an icicle, Andrea complained. More like a cherry popsicle, Ronnie said. Yeah, whatever. Our redheaded friend turned and stomped off through the snow. The wind rushed up to encircle me. In its howl, I heard a familiar laugh. This disembodied sound had chased me since my teenage years. I looked at our car, now coated with a thin layer of snow. I had an urgent desire to get in, drive back across the border to the Buffalo airport, and fly back to Manhattan. Though the laughter also haunted me there, at least in familiar surroundings, I could almost ignore it. While I thought about fleeing, the lake wind pushed me toward the house. I held fast. Ronnie grabbed the sleeve of my black faux fur coat. Come on, I pulled away. I can't. The laugh. You're hearing it again? I nodded. She took me by the shoulders. You're not being haunted, Katie. What you hear is just in your head. How many times do I have to tell you that? Now get inside before we both get sick. When I still resisted, she gave me a tight-lipped stare. Her way of saying, Kaitlyn Novacs, get over yourself. Ken and I were here for our anniversary 5 years ago, she said. This is a beautiful place, not some crappy dump with cobwebs your warped mind is turning it into. Now move! I gritted my teeth and took a deep breath. Nothing in this house could be worse than what I've been through, I thought. The wind howled again, louder this time. It might have been telling me, you think so? Ronnie's grin wrinkled her eyes. What an expression. You look like an Eskimo searching for the nearest dog sled. Want to rub noses? I grabbed a handful of snow from a bush and flung it at her. Then, feeling a rush of warmth from my best and sometimes only friend, I hugged her. Yeah, I love you too, she said. Now can we get out of this storm? With her hand propelling me forward, I slogged through the drifting snow from the parking lot to the Niagara Inn's door, where Andrea O'Rourke waited. Chapter 2, the Niagara Inn. A heavy-set, grandmotherly woman greeted us. I'm Mrs. Hughes, Naomi Hughes, the innkeeper. She held the storm door open. I must say, I'm glad you could make it in this blizzard. The innkeeper rubbed her hands together. Her rouged cheeks rounded into a smile. She beckoned us into a hallway with a lacquered oak floor so highly polished it gleamed in the light of the chandelier. The walls were lined with flock paper. A flight of stairs rose to a landing, turned, and rose again. At the foot of the stairs was an intricately carved newel post. Always drawn to such ornate craftsmanship, I stepped toward the newel post. When I touched it, I felt a chill, then heard someone whisper. I glanced over my shoulder. Only the four of us were in the hall. None of the others had spoken. Mrs. Hughes stared at me. Let me get you out of your coat, she said. Doesn't she hear the whispering? I looked to Ronnie, then Andrea. It appeared as though they hadn't heard the voice either. The innkeeper touched my arm. Your coat, dear? Behind me, a floorboard creaked. It sounded as though someone climbed the stairs. My head swung around. What? Ronnie said. The whispering stopped. I sucked in my lower lip. Mrs. Hughes brushed snow from our coats onto the door stoop, then hung them on a rack. On a rubber mat, we struggled out of our boots. In our stocking feet, she introduced us to the house once owned by a man she called Old Tom Burke. A real entrepreneur, Mr. Burke, the innkeeper explained. He owned a number of businesses around here. Old money, I guess you'd say today. Mined during the California gold rush. A history lesson, Ronnie remarked. Andrea remarked. We should take notes. Might be a quiz later. Ronnie glared at her. Hush! Mrs. Hughes led us to a room near the front door. This is the gentleman's parlor. Mr. Burke spent a good deal of time in here when the house reverted to him at the end of your American Civil War. Lit only by gray sunlight that filtered through curtains over tall windows, the room seemed to be bathed in a mauve mist. A thick white beam ran up the wall and across the ceiling. Craning my neck to look into the room, I saw 4 plush armchairs and a sofa, all covered in fabrics reminiscent of a past age. I sniffed. It smelled like I'd stepped into a bakery. Again staring at me, Mrs. Hughes took my elbow and steered me to another room. Your meals will be served in here. When? Andrea asked. Ronnie grinned at her. What? We haven't eaten since we got on the plane. Andrea O'Rourke's hunger didn't surprise me. Well below average height, no matter how many hours she spent in the gym, she couldn't shed what she called her baby fat. Breakfast is at 9:30, Mrs. Hughes said. That dining room table, by the way, is one of our very old pieces. It dates from the 1790s. The oak table filled a modest interior, with walls painted a deep historic green. The window and cabinets were trimmed in white enamel. A brick fireplace filled one wall. I can imagine a lot of serious conversations taking place around that old table, Ronnie said. Maybe even George Washington sat there. I doubt that. Mrs. Hughes' voice had a defensive tinge. This isn't the United States. With some pride, she added, it's rumored Queen Victoria sat right there when she visited us in the 1880s. Andrea sighed. Hope the fire's not lit while we're eating. If it is, someone's ass is going to get burnt. Mrs. Hughes' grunt sounded like a comment on American manners. Yes, well, she said, we have a relaxing weekend planned for you ladies. Breakfasts, there'll be catered dinners each night. With a glance at Andrea, she pointed through the open door to the kitchen. If you get hungry in between, please feel free to raid the refrigerator. Her face again lit with a smile. She completed her welcoming speech with, I picked out a number of movies I think you'll enjoy watching, so I hope you'll make yourselves at home here. If you choose, you won't have to get out of your pajamas all day. Of course, there's always the town to wander through if it stops snowing. Even if it doesn't, Ronnie responded with a laugh. All this white stuff to run through, it could be like an old-fashioned winter at home. Mom and Dad by the fire, holding hands, singing carols. I had no memory of my parents doing anything of the kind. Those times they weren't arguing. My mother would read in the kitchen with a glass of scotch near at hand, while my father watched television in his den. Sounds like someone else's home, I muttered, lips pulled back as if I'd sucked on a lemon. Stop being a killjoy, Ronnie scolded. Stop. I thought you brought me here because that's what I am. As usual, you've got things skewed, kiddo. I took you with us to keep you from thinking about. Everyone must have heard my sharp intake of breath. Our trek through the snowstorm had briefly knocked Richard Slattery from my mind. Ronnie's slip brought everything back. Richard, what he wanted. I tried to twist off the engagement ring he'd given me. It still wouldn't budge. Outside, the wind hissed with laughter. Ronnie rushed to my side. Hey, none of that. It's going to be okay, I promise. You're here to forget for a while. As if I could. Katie, I'm trying. I gave her a weak smile. She stroked my arm. Yeah, I know. Your imagination has you all wound up. A couple of days of being pampered, you'll get back to yourself. Then you can go home, marry Richard, and I won't do that. I can't. Listen to me, Ronnie said. Richard isn't your ex. He loves you and you love him. It shows in your face when you're together. What if I do? Doesn't matter, not when. The window shook. The laughing wind stopped me. In the quiet that followed, I opened my mouth to continue the argument, but closed it when I heard footfalls on the second floor. My head bobbed up. Mrs. Hughes peeked at me from the corner of her eye. We ought to get you ladies settled in. Leah, she called toward the kitchen, would you come here, please, show our guests to their rooms? In a softer voice, she explained, Leah Campbell is our housekeeper. If there's anything you need, ask her. A very thin woman came through the kitchen door, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her black dress and sweater looked like old widow's weeds. She even wore a black apron. From the creases on her forehead and cheeks, I thought she must be in her late 60s. While Leah Campbell approached, a stirring above again drew my attention. Not my imagination. I definitely heard someone pacing. The footsteps went back and forth, constant, driven. But ours was the only car in the lot. Is there another guest here this weekend? I asked. Mrs. Hughes' smile tightened. She rubbed her hands on her gray skirt. Everyone else canceled when they heard about the storm. Someone's walking up there, I said. Is it another staff member? Mrs. Hughes' ample chest expanded with a deep intake of breath. As she slowly released it, her eyes flicked in the housekeeper's direction. No, only Miss Campbell and I work here. The pacing continued. Leah Campbell looked toward the stairs. I stared at her. The woman had her hair pulled back into a severe bun, which emphasized a hawk-like nose and a sharply pointed chin. Her skin was so pale it might have been frostbitten. As the pacing became more persistent, she seemed to shrink back toward the kitchen. She hears it too. Her head cocked, Andrea said, I don't hear anything. Me either. From the way Ronnie's eyes narrowed, I knew she wondered if she'd been right to bring me to this place. When she glanced down to her purse, I thought she might be ready to pull out her cell phone and call Dr. Carver, the psychologist I'd seen during the 7 years since my marriage fell apart, and then I did. The footsteps came closer. They seemed to reach the top of the stairs, then started to descend. I backed away. I don't want to go up there. I held my ears. When I released them, the footsteps had stopped. I'm sure I heard. Andrea clapped her hands. Maybe it's a ghost. I've always wanted to meet one. Ronnie signaled her with an urgent shake of the head. It's her, the one that. The housekeeper stopped abruptly when Mrs. Hughes shot a glance at her. See, what you hear is just the house settling under the snow, Mrs. Hughes said. You know how beams groan in these old places. See, everything's explained if you're willing to be rational, Ronnie said. It's more fun to think it might really be a ghost. Is there one living here? Andrea seemed so excited by the idea, she almost panted. Ronnie smacked her arm. The housekeeper opened her mouth. Before she could speak, Mrs. Hughes said, "Groaning beams. Of course that's what you heard." She turned her eyes briefly to me, then glanced up at the ceiling. "Now, if you'll excuse me, ladies, I have to finalize the arrangements for our dinner. Leah will show you to your rooms." The housekeeper watched Mrs. Hughes retreating back, as if she desperately wanted to follow her. Face pinched, lips tight, she muttered, "Only the old wood settling in the house. So she says." Leah Campbell stood unmoving on the bottom step, gnawing at her lip. I'd have bet all I owned that she didn't want to go upstairs any more than I did. After a minute, she sighed. Pulling at the waist of her skirt, she said, "All right then, follow me, please." I backed away. "I don't want to stay here. Ronnie, please, let's go home." "Roads are all closed because of the snow," the housekeeper said. She grabbed for the banister, as if her arms might pull her in a direction her legs didn't want to go. Ronnie pushed me toward the stairs. "We're staying." Lugging our bags, we climbed behind Leah Campbell to the second floor. Each stair tread groaned underfoot. "Only an old house settling in the snow," I muttered, willing myself to believe it. End of chapter 2.
Oh boy, what happens next?
Well, I will tell you that they do go upstairs to Abigail's room.
Oh yeah. It's easy to conjure up a paranormal experience in that area of Western New York. Niagara on the Lake has been, I think featured on Ghost Hunters for Today. And the old inns, the Backamore, Prince of Wales, and the Apothecary Museum are still there. And still, if one has been up there, which I think many of us have been, this setting just, started it off in an atmosphere that we could understand. And as the story develops and we get into some of the other aspects of the ghost Abigail or the apparition Abigail and the life that she'd led and the paradoxes between hers and Katie's, it's very interesting. But there were a couple parts of the book that intrigued me because Kate, I guess they called her, for a lawyer and a woman of such immense perceived intelligence, I was really uneasy about her past bouts with, as she said, she went to an asylum and she had a nervous breakdown, and the ability for her to go back and forth from this reality in a trance-like setting. Was her loss of her first child and her failed marriage enough to take one person from reality and shun any further close relationship? I think I wanted to open that up to everybody, especially you, though.
The answer is yes. I thank God a million times and knock on wood. I didn't lose a child, but my marriage did break up, and not in a happy way. It left me in a place where I really, really, really did not want to enter another relationship. For a long time, I didn't. And when I was offered the opportunity to move up here to Western New York, I jumped at it as a way of taking myself away from those memories and everything and everybody that held a place in those memories. Over time, I've gotten past it. But recalling what I had been through, and I am also a lawyer, I'm retired now, but recalling what I had been through, it was not a far reach to bring Kaitlyn to that point, to that place. And yes, I did, well, some of the things she experienced, yes, indeed, I did. I will admit, if you recall, there's a scene in there, Kaitlyn in her kitchen, and she opens the refrigerator and a box of eggs comes out. That happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really
And Kaitlyn didn't have a family either. She didn't have a mother or father. So she was suffering as a child, that sort of stability.
Yes, exactly. Given who her parents, and in the course of the story, you see her relationship with her parents and her parents' relationship with each other develop. And it certainly leads to everything that Kaitlyn goes through, um, including, well, her finding that ghosts are real. And
You believe ghosts are real?
oh, beyond a doubt. As a matter of fact, I think that Abigail from the book, I think she now spends part of her time living with me.
Oh, I thought you were being facetious before.
Oh no, there were, God, there have been a couple of things that have happened. I will say, thank goodness she's not a malicious ghost.
Yeah.
A psychic actually described her to me and said, oh, she's kind of nice. I said, good, we don't want to move her out of here then, because she's company. But there was a time I was writing, well, one of the things I do in the evenings is I sit with the crossword puzzle book on my lap, and I'm doing that with the TV on only to just keep me company. And I turned to the coffee table. I was writing with a green plastic pen. I put the pen in the book. I leaned over to the coffee table to get my cigarettes. I lit up. I went down to get the pen and the pen's gone. No pen. I looked all over the place. I moved chairs. I looked under the table. No pen. The next morning, I came downstairs and by the foot of the coffee table, there was a green plastic guitar pick. I play guitar. A guitarist knows what picks she has. I never owned a green plastic pick. Never.
Ah!
Yeah. And there was another time, God, I've forgotten. Oh, my reading glasses. I do my work here in my work area on the second floor. And when I finish writing for the day, I'll put my glasses on the mouse pad and go take a shower. That day, I came back from the shower, got back into my nightie. I wasn't going anyplace, COVID going on. And I looked for my glasses. They weren't there. Nope. I crawled all over. I crawled all over the place up here on the second floor. Did I put them in the guest room? I looked in the bathroom. Did I put them up there by mistake? Nope. I'm getting older. I forget things. Did I go downstairs and leave them down there? No. Nowhere to be found. Fortunately, I had an old pair. Not quite the vision that I needed, but okay, I could work with it. But I said, I just looked around and I said, Abigail, give me the damn glasses back. I heard a little bit of laughter. And this went on for about a week. Finally, frustrated, I said, Abby, please, can I have those glasses back? I really need them if I'm going to keep writing. The next morning, I came down, they were in the middle of my kitchen floor. I don't know how. I don't.
Wow.
So, yes. Abby at least is a nice ghost. The ghost that threw the
Yeah.
me was not.
Another thing I found difficult was how easily she was drawn into that spirit world and became completely detached from her surroundings. She literally threw herself into Abigail Bender's life. Did you know anyone or model the book after any one person's behavior? I know you just said it was a lot of the experiences that you had. And now my question was, do you dabble in that realm, the paranormal? But now I see, I think you do. And especially if you've had some mediums. But I think that another part of the book, and this is maybe two-pronged here, is that it was easy to get involved again into Abigail's love life with Will, simply because so much of what Will was involved in, a lot of people in the North were involved in helping people escape from the South into Canada.
Yep.
Where we didn't even feel the northern U.S. was safe, but I guess the bounty hunters really didn't have any jurisdiction in Canada, so that's maybe one of the reasons they went up here.
Although there are some records of bounty hunters catching up with escaped slaves in Canada and literally kidnapping them back to the States.
Mm.
So it didn't happen often, but it could.
Yeah.
This, by the way, was an interesting thing for me. I think I mentioned, as a writer, even writing fiction, research plays such a major part in all of my writing, and probably takes up half of the time that I devote to my writing. When I moved up here in 1999, I had no idea of what a remarkable place Western New York is. The role that it played in the Underground Railroad and the Civil War. When I read all of these things during my research, literally in books that I've since purchased and at the libraries, both here and across in Canada, my jaw just dropped. It was just, I found it remarkable. For me, it's not surprising that literally for the first time in my life, I think of this area as home. No matter where else I'd lived, I never did before. So that's an important factor to me, and it's the reason that I write so much about this area in Western New York. By the way, I did go to the Underground Railroad exhibit by the train station in Niagara Falls. And literally, it's a place that you could walk through in a half hour. I spent 2.5 hours walking through it just without saying a word. So yes, this is an incredible, incredible place. And I don't ever want to live anywhere else. And I'm proud. I'm proud to be from here now. So as to the question of whether there were other people that the characters are based on, yes, a girlfriend that I had downstate, her name was Ronnie, but not Ronnie Hoffman. Ronnie Hoffman is based very much on her and her personality. Andrea is also based on another friend. Dangerous to get too close to an author. You're going to wind up in my book sooner or later. And Abigail, though, is pure invention. Will is a man that I found during my research. His name wasn't Will Bender. but he is based on that character. Richard was, while I was writing the book, I guess the man that I would have fallen in love with.
Yeah.
So
He sounds too ideal.
yeah, that's the reason well, please, if it's my book, I can make him what I want him to be. He is perfect.
He is perfect.
Yeah. And
Did the real Will go to Allegheny College? Just out of curiosity.
That I don't know. I know he was college. I know that he was involved in the Underground Railroad. I know that he served in the Civil War. I will not tell you more than that because would be giving away a piece of the story. But yeah, I don't know if that's what he looked like. I never saw a picture of him. But when you talk about the research, part of the research, because so much occurred in and around the time of the Civil War, I needed to make the dialogue of the characters from that era sound like they did. That was a whole lot of research. We don't speak that way today. Now, Joanne, to answer another part of your question, I will not do any ghost hunting. Never will again, because that ghost, that was the bad one. There was a time that I went to I went and did a Ouija board with friends.
Ooh.
And I believe the spirit followed me home, and took a while to get rid of it. I literally had to move. But when you think about the paranormal, the Emlyn Good mystery novels are, in a sense, although they're murder mysteries certainly, and cozies, it is in a sense paranormal, because Emlyn Good is a direct descendant of Sarah Good, who was hanged as a witch in Salem. And Emlyn has Sarah's, shall we call it, a diary with a lot about Sarah's life, but also about the herbalism that she practiced and the chants that she would say. And Emlyn is attempting to solve crimes through witchcraft.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Those books all have a sense of humor, I will tell you. Murder with a sense of humor is my thing. But Emlyn is not doing it very well and getting into trouble as a result. But yeah, I do constantly a lot of research on that. And it's funny because when I read my first book on Wicca and herbalism, I was sitting there in my living room and I said, "Ooh, this all makes sense to me." I knew where it was coming from. I knew where it was going to. Had I been a witch in a past life? I don't know. But that was a question that has stayed with me. Thus, part of the premise of the new book that I will commercial called "What's Past is Prologue." Anyhow.
What's past is prologue. We'll be looking for that. It also, Kaitlyn has to come to terms with herself in this book.
Yes.
And there's a couple sentences here where she's talking to Abigail and she goes, "Oh, Abby, I can't begin to imagine how devastated you were. I hate that you had to go through it." She lifted the hem of her skirt to wipe her eyes. "It's a kindness for you to say so, especially kind, because I know you also lost one you love very dearly." So no matter who you are, that can apply to many, many situations where, parent, friend, loved one of any kind always draws you back into yourself. And I saw this happening throughout the book, relating to your own situation on many levels. So I thought it was cleverly done in that respect.
Thank you.
Although I wanted to just give her a kick in the ass every once in a while to say, "Look, you are screwing up your life. Stop it and get back to reality." So.
find that's exactly what Abigail was doing.
Yeah.
And at the end of the book, you begin to understand why.
Yeah. Very clever how everything tied out at the end.
Yeah, I tried. A lot of work. I think I probably went through 8 or 9 drafts of this book before it went to my publisher. Uh, and that included working on it with my novel writers group. And we went through another 3 drafts with the editor before the book came out. So between us all, we try to make sure that everything was covered and everything tied together, and questions would all be answered. A trick I learned from a very dear friend. I mentioned it before, Daryl Ross, who's not only my mentor, but a very, very close friend. Anyway,
Thank you for a very enjoyable book. Do we have any other questions? Because I can go on.
please go on.
Yeah, go on. We don't have any Q&As yet.
Q&A. How could, in this other part here, Abigail told me her heart tore on Will's words. How could she have known it then, when one day after she sat beside him on the beach, held him, found words she didn't know she possessed, to strip off the guilt he wore like a mourning coat? How could she have foreseen it would lead to this? The realization of what love would cost her felt like a slap. He recoiled when he again reached for her and said he knew he must go. And of course, this is when he's heading off into 2 kinds of battles, actually. A battle to save the souls of people that he didn't know, and also the battle of the physical battle of war that was raging throughout the Civil War, which was an incredibly, if you go down
had been a historic fiction as opposed to a love story in the paranormal and all of that. So I'm wondering why you chose to add that dimension of the paranormal and not just do a strict historical fiction, which I found that I thought the whole story was wonderful. And as I told you before everybody got on, I loved how you tied it all up in a neat bow at the very end. And I won't give it away because I'd love for everyone to have a chance to read it and experience it the way I did. But I particularly liked that whole story about the Civil War and how people moved back and forth across the border, and how he was drawn into the war. I thought it was interesting when they were moving the slaves across the water, and I will share this much, I'll give this much away, and he did kill the bounty hunters or the slave hunters, and how much Will suffered from extinguishing those lives. I thought that was very interesting and very poignant. But anyway, my real question is why you chose to add that extra dimension and not stick with a straight historical fiction.
I believe that goes back to how the story was first conceived and why it was first conceived. The man I worked for at the time as in-house counsel, he owned several beds and breakfasts in Niagara-on-the-Lake. And he knew that I was writing, and I'd had a number of short stories published at that time. And he had asked me, it was coming up to Valentine's Day, he had asked me if I would write a very short love story, 1 page that he could leave on the dresses in the rooms of his guests. Of course, I said, sure, you don't say no to the man that signs your paychecks. And I needed to know more about the houses. Now, I had been to this particular house. It is not, by the way, the Niagara Inn. The house, when it was a bed and breakfast, had a very different name, which I don't use in the book because when it was sold to a family that used it as a private residence, and they have children. I don't need the kids to worry about whether they have a ghost in the house. I do believe that there is a ghost that lives in that house. And I even heard the footsteps that are in this novel. And I was told about it by the innkeeper one day when I was there, and talking to her about the house, and trying to find the nexus for a short love story. And I did hear the walking on the second floor. I ran up the stairs because a lawyer is totally logical. Can't be ghosts. I ran up the stairs, and when I opened the door to the room the footsteps were coming from, I heard a sigh, and nobody was in the room. Okay, so I had a ghost in the house. There was the start of the story. Since it had to be a love story for Valentine's Day, I gave Abigail a love affair. But as the short story was developed, to be able to tell the story in a way that would bring it forward, and make it readable or understandable to people in the current time who were staying at the house, I had a character stay at the house and wind up meeting Abigail and hearing her story, not in the kind of detail, but that character also in the short story had lost a love, had broken up with a man, and Abigail was moving her with Abigail's love story. So there was the short story, and it worked. The patrons of the house enjoyed it. I got some very nice comments. That story, Abigail Bender, was an honorable mention in the Writer's Journal, as Joanne was so kind to mention. Then I showed the story to my sister, Robin, and she decided that she loved it. It has to be a novel. So there I had everything tied together. I had the current woman, the ghost's romance, and a romance that the current woman had lost. I felt that's the way I had to build. That's the way I had to build the story, and it took about a year to turn it into the novel. But it for me it worked. For me, it fell all together. And again,
For me too, Susan. I like the book a great deal.
Thank you. But as I was saying, for me, it was a way of bringing Abigail's story so it doesn't sound, for me, stilted. Bringing it forward to the present time and letting it have meaning, not only then, but meaning in the present time.
Another thing that, in addition to, it's not really a genre I normally would choose to read, but I'm so glad I did read it. But another level to the whole thing is the idea of reincarnation and how you folded that concept. Another concept I have a great deal of difficulty believing in. I just think I'm so lucky in this life. I don't want to try again. I just think that I've hit the jackpot this time. I'm not taking any chances. But I thought that was really interesting how you folded that concept into the book as well. Do you want to address that a little bit?
Yeah, well, again, the concept of reincarnation, of course, it starts with the old thought that if you don't get it right this time, well, life presents you with lessons to learn. You can either learn them or you can refuse. If you learn them, you get to move on to the next lesson. If you refuse, then the lesson is presented to you again. And eventually, if you still don't get it, it's presented to you with a sledgehammer upside the head. This, by the way, was something the therapist that I was seeing after my marriage broke up, this was something that she was explaining to me. The idea of reincarnation, I mentioned I mentioned before something about it. There have been other instances where I've had a bit of a sneak peek. I think one of them, for most of my life, I had had these terrible maze dreams. Claustrophobic, running through a maze in an attic. I don't know where the claustrophobia came from. I don't know where the concept of the maze came from. But that was it. And I had a very dear friend who was a psychologist. He should rest in peace. His name was Bruce. And we were talking one night. He was now specializing in past life regressions. And we were talking about it one night, and I allowed him as an experiment to attempt to regress me. And what he found was that I was a young girl, a young Jewish girl in Poland during the Second World War. And at the as the Germans were retreating from Russia, they came through the town. I have no idea what the town was, but I had been staying along with other Jewish children with a farmer who then moved us to this town, and he hid us all in an attic of this building. And I was the oldest, and he told me, you need to stay calm. You need to keep all the children quiet. The attic, God, eventually, there were footsteps below us, and one of the children started to cry, and the trap door to the attic opened. This head with the kind of cap that the German officers would wear poked through. I went into a panic. I started running through this attic that was with boxes all over the place to this circular window with a board across that would go to the building across the street. I got to the board. I took a step onto it. The German grabbed my leg. I fell, however many floors it was, to the street, and I died. That's what Bruce explained to me. I don't know whether that's true, whether it's reality. I will say that about 3 months later, I was in a very bad car accident, and my neck was broken, and they put me into one of those coffin MRIs. Before going through this with Bruce, as claustrophobic as I was, I would have been in a blind panic. I would have kicked, I would have screamed, I would have refused. After this, I just lay there quietly listening to the music they had on. Another instance, and again, not quite so visual. By the way, one of the things that Bruce explained to me is that the reason I was able to revisit this so easily is because my death left an unfinished life. And so the door to the past life was slightly ajar. Again, true or not, I don't know. But another instance.
Good outline for a great novel.
Yeah. And I probably will write that one day. But another instance that did lead to my new novel, there was this old yellow brick rundown tenement where I used to live in Queens. And anytime I would walk past it, I went into a blind panic. As I got older and I had to drive past it because that's how I got to law school, I would be in a blind panic. I would go miles out of my way to avoid going past that building. I don't know why. I'd never been in it as far as I know. Could I have had a terrible experience there years and years ago? I don't know. I will say, and the reason that it did lead to the new book, is that some months after I was speaking about this with my editor, I was watching an episode of Mysteries at the Museum, and they were digging up in this segment. They were digging up a parking lot in Queens, and the lot was close because I knew exactly where it was. It was close to that old yellow brick building, and under the cement in the lot, they found old bones.
Jimmy Hoffa.
Things came together. I said, aha, I've got a story. I did move that old building. I found an older yellow building up here in Niagara Falls. So I just moved the building there. But it's these types of experiences that, and I suspect for all authors, are the seed from which these stories grow.
Susan, remarkable. And really, for anyone who hasn't finished the novel, please do so, or I would go through it and let you know how intriguing it was in different parts. But I'm so glad you had this time to spend with us here at our group. And it was very special. And I shall remember it.
Thank you. You know, it's special for me also.
Michaela has a question, right,
I
Michaela?
do, yes. So we have one Q&A from a Susan, and she says she's looking forward to reading your book. She says, I am currently transcribing 127 letters written by my great-grandfather to his sister while he served in the Civil War. You'd mentioned that the way the people spoke in 1861 is different than how we speak today. She says that's an understatement. Was there a source you referenced to help you understand the 1861 to 1865 way of communication?
The answer to that is yes. I mentioned that so much of my time is spent in research. And I don't recall which library it was where I found it, but I found a book that had letters that were written home from a soldier that was in the Civil War. And it was a soldier that came from originally Western New York. It was, and I read those letters with fascination. And for who asked the question, I admire your grandfather. I admire his courage. I can't say enough about that. But as in so much else, this research led me to the language that was used. And I don't think it would have been quite as accurate a book for me as telling a book if I hadn't. And forgive me, I do not recall which book it was, but I know I read it from cover to cover. It wasn't large, so please, I encourage you to continue to transcribe that.
Any more, Michaela?
Susan,
Sorry, one more just popped through. So this is from Fran. Says, glad you are a part of our Western New York culture. Thoroughly enjoyed your book. Did you write while you were practicing law?
The answer is yes. I was mostly writing short stories at the time. Although after I moved up here, it goes back to 1959, my first novel was published. That was a murder mystery. But I have been writing for most of my life. I mentioned I play guitar. I haven't played it much recently, so some of the skills are gone. But through high school and through college, I performed with a rock band, and I wrote the music for the band. After I graduated from college, the band broke up. I guess I left the band because I realized we weren't going to be superstars, although one or two of the songs that I wrote at the time did get recorded. I will not mention what they are because I don't want to remember them. But while I was for most of my writing, through law school and through practicing law, with the exception of a dabbling at short stories that never quite developed, never quite got finished, it was mostly legal writing. And I became reasonably adept at that. After my marriage broke up, well, that happened at the same time I realized I was practicing in the entertainment field. And I realized that most of my clients were crazier than I am. It's horrifying. So I literally moved away from law for a while. I took a job with an old friend of mine as a contributing editor to the art magazine, the glossy art magazine, SunStorm Fine Arts. And for 5 years, I was writing half the stories for the magazine. One of the nice things that Victor Forbes did, he was the editor, the managing editor of the magazine. He encouraged me to be as creative in my writing as I could. At that time, the short stories began to develop again, and they've continued ever since. For the most part, and if you see the volume of my short stories, most of them dealt with more serious topics. There was one short murder mystery, but it was really a murder because I was making a different point. But the stories themselves were on more serious topics, things that affect me, things that affect people that I know. Until Gary Earl Ross sat me down after a writers group meeting one day. We had been talking about murder mysteries and how much I love them. And he said, "Susan, why don't you write one?" And I laughed and I said, "Well, I've tried, but I can't plot it." And then Gary did the unthinkable, dared me. And it took only 3 months. I started with another short story that I'd written, built it from there. That short story became chapters 2 and 3 of the book. And that was the first murder mystery, the first Demling Good mystery. And the short story itself was written from a prompt that was given to me by the editor of one of the online journals that a number of my stories have been published in. So, yes, the short answer is yes. Later in my legal career, I was writing seriously. But that was for the most part after I'd moved up here.
Are there any other questions?
Goodness.
No, not that I can see here.
And Susan, what do you have? You don't have to reveal too many secrets, but what do you have in the future for us to explore?
Well, as I mentioned, what's passed as prologue has been out, God, I don't remember when it was released, not just a couple of months ago. And already it's gotten, I've seen 4 rave reviews about it. Thank you.
Congratulations.
That story deals, as I said, with reincarnation and the old yellow brick building. There is a novel that I am now working on with the writers group called Raising Cain, Cain spelled Kane, which deals in a large part with the 1960s and all that was going on at that time. That was the era in which I grew up. And that story cycles around around a journalist who is given an assignment to learn about a woman that had been a campus rebel and later a rock star that just disappeared at the height of her career. And the question that the editor wanted was why. So that's what that story is. While I'm working on that, because God knows I don't know how to work on just one thing at a time, the new Emlyn Good novel is about a third of the way written. And I am actively writing that. And finally, in the last 2 days, the story is becoming clear and the words are beginning to flow. And I know how to get Emlyn in trouble again. I also was asked by my editor to co-write a novel with him. And we are now 3 chapters into it. And it's now my job to write the 4th chapter. It's called The Magician. And it's about a man who was fascinated by magic, as his parents used to take him to Las Vegas to see the magic shows. And now he wants to be a magician. And all the things that he will go through will be in this book. God, I also have a new idea, and I've just started to jot notes in my writer's journal on it. I would like to start another mystery series set in a retirement home or retirement complex with one of the older gentlemen that's there and his older sweetheart that he's met there, working together to try to solve a crime. I think it might actually be based around a murder mystery night dinner that actually turns into a murder. I'm not sure.
Oh, interesting.
I'm beginning to make notes. And
I think you're retired.
never. I realized this a while ago as the stories just started to flow.
Mm.
Writing is what I want to do when I get up in the morning. It's what I want to be doing before I go to bed at night. It's the thing that I love. Cooking is
Wonderful.
but writing is it.
Well, Abigail better not hide your glasses anymore.
We've reached
Or your pen.
together, and I know that she's here, and I know when she wants my attention.
Great.
Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Joanne, for leading us through this evening. Michaela, always for helping out and keeping things on track. But a great big thank you to Susan for spending time with us and for the really wonderful read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. If you've not read it, I encourage you to do so. You can purchase it at one of our local independent bookstores. Please support them during this time. It's so important to do that.
They will be able to order it for you.
Yes.
Otherwise,
Yes,
you can find it on Amazon in both Kindle and in paperback.
I will share that I did read it on Kindle, but that's just because it's an easy for me to do so.
I kind of like to feel the pages in my hand, which is why I don't have a Kindle, but then I am an older woman, so this is me.
I think I'm pretty much your age, Susan, but I've learned to rely on that Kindle. It's works out well for me.
And what I like about it is that it's so much, you can get so many wonderful books at such a small price. To me, that's absolutely perfect.
Yes. And the other thing is I'm not tripping over books that are loitering all over my living room floor. So that's another good reason to switch to Kindle. But before I go, I do have a few programming notes to make. I'd like to start with Michaela, if you'd be kind enough to share a little bit about February 12th, second Friday, Michaela.
Yeah. Absolutely. So join us next Friday, like Mary said, February 12th, and our event starts at 5:30. We're going to have 4 presenters and musicians and artists. So we have 2 musical performances. For the first, starting at 6:15, is Kevin Sampson, and then at 7:45 we have Philip Stephen. But starting off the night are the 2 artists from our upcoming opening exhibition, Making Strange. At 5:30 we have Margaret Shakangust doing an artist talk and demo. And then at 7 p.m., Masha Shah will also be presenting and doing an artist demo as well. So join us then.
And the next day, Saturday, February 13th, is Family Day. And that program, which starts at 10 a.m., is featuring the artist Annie Hoover. I just learned I've been pronouncing her name wrong all this time. It's Annie, not Annie. And she has that incredible exhibition, Forget Me Not, upstairs in the Rosen Gallery, but she will be doing Family Day for us on February 13th. Next month's book club, we actually will be having 2 of them. Our regular one is on March 4th. We'll be featuring a book by Lisa Marie Redman. Her book is called The Secrets They Left Behind. Lisa Redman was a former cold case homicide detective for the Buffalo Police Department. And after 22 years on the force, she retired and is using her experience to write these cold case mysteries. I don't think there are any ghosts in that one, Susan. I think those are all real people, alive and dead.
Yes, but if I might butt in for just a second, Lisa is a friend, and I read the book, and it is such a wonderful book, so well written. It's certainly worth reading.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. And then we're going to have a sneak-in book club on March 18th. The author is Jessica Winter. She wrote a book called The Fourth Child. It's a book launch, so you won't be reading the book ahead. It actually will not be released until, I think, just a day or 2 before. And Jessica Winter is an editor at The New Yorker, and her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, Book Forum, and many other places. So I will send that email out. We'll be meeting twice in March. And I want to thank everybody for this evening. Thank you again, Susan. I applaud you, and I hope you'll visit us again.
I would be more than happy to. This has been such an absolute pleasure. Mary, thank you. Joanne, thank you. Michelle, thank you so very much for this opportunity.
Great. And I'll see you all in March. Good night.
Everyone take care.